welcome to Up to Me. We are happy that you're here. My name is Kristen Kosyluk, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of Mental Health Law and Policy here at USF. And I am here with my colleague, Carter. Carter, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Carter Williams. I'm a sophomore at USF. I'm currently studying public health, and I'm one of the facilitators here for Up to Me, working with Dr. Kosyluk and the rest of the team.
Yeah, thanks, Carter. So thank you for joining us today. You may recall that you have shown interest in participating in this group because you identify as a student living with a mental health condition who maybe sometimes feels a sense of shame or embarrassment or a sense of anxiety around disclosing or sharing about your mental health condition. So that's what this group is meant to help you with. So the goals for this overall group are to help you to consider what the costs and benefits of disclosing are. And when I say disclosing, I mean disclosing one's experiences with mental health challenges. And this could be to some people. It doesn't have to be to all people. So part of this group will help you to decide who is a safe person to disclose to in your life. And then once you've made a decision about whether you want to disclose and who to disclose to, the program also helps you, consider strategies for disclosing effectively if you decide to do so. So this group is comprised of 3 lessons, and the first one is the one that we're going to tackle with you today via this recording. This one is called Lesson 1, and it's considering the pros and cons of disclosing. So if you were to turn to page 5 of your manual, you would be able to follow along with us right now. So you should have a hard copy or a PDF of this in front of you, or you should have gotten it emailed to you, have access to it. So the overview of this lesson is this: that up to me, or disclosing your mental illness to others, is the right decision for some people, but not for everyone. So the goal of this group is not to convince you to disclose. The goal of this group is to empower you to make that decision for yourself. So section 1 of this workbook, or this guide, helps you decide if disclosure is the right decision for you. And we approach this decision in 2 parts that Carter and I are going to lead you through. The first that Carter will take on is called Task 1, and that is discussing the identity of mental illness. So some people might see themselves as an individual living with a mental health condition where others may not. Or maybe you don't like the term mental illness and you prefer something else used in its place. That's what that first task is. And then task 2 is helping you to weigh the pros and the costs and the benefits, or the pros and the cons, about coming out or disclosing about your mental illness. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Carter so he can present to you task 1.
Cool. Thanks, Dr. Kosyluk. So yeah, task 1, like Dr. Kosyluk was saying, is all about deciding how you want to view yourself with mental illness, how you want to have others perceive you, thinking of pros and cons of decisions for coming out versus not coming out. So first thing we're going to have you guys do is start off by pausing the video and reading the 2 stories here that you see about Marie and John Henry. And then after you've read through those, we're going to move on to worksheet 1.1, where we're going to sort of look at the pros and cons of each story, sort of weigh why you think it was a good idea for what they did, cons, things you liked, things you didn't like. So go ahead and pause the video and you can read through that. So now that you've read through those sections, we'll kind of just talk through about some of the pros and cons of each of the decisions of Marie and John Henry. So what I put for Marie's, for some of the pros, one of the big ones, of course, would be advocacy, because she's going to these support groups, she's talking to people, she's fully open and honest about her struggles that she's had. And so she's able to really reach out to other people, help them make good connections, things like that. Then I also put support for others, which is sort of in that same vein where maybe somebody else is struggling with something that is similar to Marie's and they thought, maybe I'm alone with this, nobody's going to understand. But since Marie is so open and honest, she might be able to help this person that she may not have known before is struggling with something similar to her. Also similar to that would be peer relatability. So you may make friends that you haven't made before because suddenly you've got something in common that you didn't know about before. So it really gives you the opportunity to make more connections if you're as open and honest as she is about it. And then lastly, I put that friends can help her. So, maybe if she's going out to do something with a group of friends and her friends now know what she's struggling with, they can make sure they don't do anything that could be triggering to her, say anything that could be sort of stigmatizing or, you know, something that just makes her feel very negative in the situation. For cons, I put, of course, one of the big ones would be judgment and stigma, because if you're fully open and honest, there's still unfortunately a lot of stigma where people are going to criticize you. They're going to think you're weak, you're inferior to others. So obviously, if she's as open as she is, she's going to have to face that backlash from people who are not understanding, people who don't know, people who aren't educated on any of the topics. So that's what I would say are some of the pros and cons for Marie's choice. But then moving on to John Henry, some of the pros that I put for him would be confidentiality, because of course he's not as open as Marie is. So he's got that confidentiality, knowing that people may not perceive him in any different way than usual because he's not openly sharing this side of him to other people. Again, compared to Marie, who's just telling everybody. So, and what would come with that would be less judgment, because again, if people don't know, they have nothing to judge you on in that sense, unless they're guessing, trying to coax it out of you because they think that you may have it, something like that. So it's good that he can avoid less judgment in that scenario for himself. But some of the cons could be internalizing your struggles if, again, like with Marie, she's able to relate to peers, she can get support from others, she can make friends that have similar struggles. But for John Henry, he may feel more like he's on his own because he's not really getting any peer support if nobody else knows. So he may just be getting help from medical professionals, which is a good source of help, but sometimes that peer connection can really help. So again, less available peer support from that. But also another con would be fear of judgment, because if you're constantly living in fear that you don't want to tell it because you're afraid of that judgment, that stigma, then you could be dealing with that internalized fear that can sort of eat away at you after a while. So then for the next section, you'll see where it says, it's asking if you identify with mental illness or not, and why or why not. So I'm comfortable saying that, yes, I do identify with mental illness. I like to be very open and honest about it because I do like that peer support and that connection to where I can help not only myself, if there's other people who could share stories, but also vice versa, I could share my story and help other people. So I like having the accommodations, peer support, and just being honest with myself and with others so that I don't feel like I'm having to hide anything. So now we'll move on to the next section, which is talking about other ways besides mental illness that stigma might be discussed. So a couple of the ones that I put would be disabilities. That's often a very stigmatized topic where people with disabilities, whether it's physical disability, mental disability, anything like that, oftentimes similar to with mental health, people are perceived as weaker. You can't do things that other people can, things like that. So that's definitely one of the big ones. Then I also put gender. Gender is often a very stigmatized thing, as well as sexual orientation. And so this, up to me, is designed around mental health, but it can be changed around, thought about in different ways to really just talk about stigma in general. And so those are some of the other ways that stigma can be talked about, analyzed, weighing pros and cons of decisions to disclose. So it's a very versatile way of thinking. So now we'll do section 3, which is a little 1 to 7 scale where you can answer these 4 questions, and these are talking about personally hurtful self-stigma. So this would be how you feel about stigma, how you view it, and again, answering the questions between a scale of 1 to 7, and then adding them up at the very end. And at the very, 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 very end of this workbook, there would be Appendix 1, and that would be a little extra section that talks about ways to control self-stigma and learning to replace them with thoughts of affirming attitudes, recovery, self-determination, things like that. And that would be, if you scored over a 20, that would be something you could look into if you wanted. It's not required, but if that's something that you feel you want to sort of boost your experience with this program with, you could look into that and get a
You
little
know,
extra.
thing I realized is you're such a wonderful colleague and facilitator that you just took right on going, that I switched our tasks up. But you did a fantastic job. So I think our audience will agree that you're doing great with facilitating this. One of the things that I did forget to mention when we started out is that you should have gotten an email that had the workbook, the worksheets in electronic format for you. So as you're pausing your video here, you can go ahead and fill that out for yourself. And I just wanted to point it out here, Carter, because what the participants will realize is that as they're answering these questions, like sometimes I agree with stigma, people with mental illness are weak. Say they answer that as 7, and then they answer the next one as 6, the next one of 5, and the next one of 4. It should auto calculate for them, so they'll know if they hit that 20 threshold. It'll suggest that they might want to take a look at that appendix that you mentioned. So
Gotcha.
sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out because that was my fault.
That's okay.
I mentioned that, but go ahead. Don't let me interrupt you further.
Okay. So next we'll move on to section 2 of task 1, which is what's in a name. So this is talking about how the main goal of Up to Me is erasing the stigma of mental illness. That's the subtitle of it. That's sort of the main goal, what we're aiming to do. So while terms like people with mental health and people in recovery might hurt less, they may confuse the public about the stigma issue. So we believe it is a mental illness and not mental health that is stigmatized by the population. So words can still hurt people, and some people don't like to view themselves as somebody with mental illness. So the second part of this is going to be worksheet 1.1, which is considering terms that work for you. So we're going to go through this discussion and kind of look through the different terms that you might like, pros and cons of each, just like we've done with the previous sections. So section 3 is hurting myself with self-stigma. So Up to Me definitely believes stereotypes and prejudice are false and unjust. So some of these would be people with mental illness are violent and unpredictable. They choose to be mentally ill. They're weak. They're incompetent. All these are things that are common stigmas that are very hurtful, and that this program is designed to try and push back on that stigma, find ways to help avoid it, things like that. So unfortunately, some people with mental illness may agree with some of these stigmatized beliefs, like we just did on section 3 of the previous part. So some people may think that they are violent and unpredictable because they're mentally ill. Some people may think that they've chosen to be so. Some people may think they are weak or incompetent. So again, that's why that Appendix 1 would be available if you found that you scored high enough to where you might feel that you are experiencing those hurtful self-stigmas. So if you did score high enough and you want to look at Appendix 1, that would be a little extra booster to sort of give you some tools to rethink that, sort of freshen up your perspective on things, you could say. Did you want me to do task 2, Dr. Kosyluk,
I
or
would just
did
ask you. Thanks for being so flexible. I can absolutely do that. And then I might just suggest, if you feel like, even if you don't score a 20 or above on the scale, it still might benefit you to look at Appendix 1. So if you feel like doing that, or for sure, if you scored a 20 or above on the, the personally hurtful self-stigma exercise, if you wanted to pause your video now and just take a look at Appendix 1 and then, restart your video when you're ready, that would be great. So then I'm going to talk to you about task 2, which is considering the pros and the cons of disclosure. So there are a few objectives associated with this task. One is understanding that there are both benefits and costs to disclosing. We started to touch on that as Carter was walking through Marie and John Henry's decisions. Another important thing that we need to understand from this lesson is that only you can make this choice for yourself. Only you can weigh these pros and these cons for your personal decision making. And third, what's important to understand is that the costs and benefits around disclosure are going to look different depending on what setting you're thinking of disclosing in. So the costs and benefits of disclosing in, for example, a classroom setting might be very different than the costs and the benefits of disclosing to your roommate. And so these worksheets that are provided to you in this workbook, there's extra blank copies of them in the back of the workbook. So you could use those, say you're thinking, and for the purpose of the exercise that we'll walk through, you're thinking about disclosing in a classroom, but later on you're like, maybe I want to disclose to my roommate. Well, you can use one of those blank worksheets to run through the exercise again later on to make that additional disclosure decision. Okay, so if you take a look at worksheet, let's make sure I'm in the right place here. It's not a worksheet, it's a table, worksheet 1.2, sorry. And it's titled Some Reasons Why People Decide to Disclose Their Mental Illness. So there's a number of different reasons listed here, and you could probably add to this list, but just a few. To tell the secret, concealing a stigmatized identity, whether that's a mental illness or, as Carter mentioned, some of the other stigmatized identities that exist, like being a member of the LGBTQ plus community can sometimes be stigmatized. It takes a lot of effort to hide that. And we spend so much time hiding it that can feel like a real relief to get that secret off our chest. Carter also mentioned this feeling of understanding. If you disclose, then you can connect with others who have similar experiences to you, and you can feel more understood. Having somebody say to you, maybe I haven't been through the same thing you've been through, but I've been through something similar, and I get it. I know how hard it can be really helpful. And then obtaining support and assistance. You can't get help from a therapist or a primary care doctor or even a peer if you don't share that you're experiencing any challenges. Particularly in a school setting, reasonable accommodations are really important. It always is surprising to me how many students don't realize that they are entitled to accommodations if they're experiencing a mental illness that's creating disability for them. So you could go to your disability services office here at USF. It's called Student Accessibility Services. They can help you to pursue formal accommodations in the classroom if you want. And that could be things like additional time on tests, if you're struggling with anxiety. It could be, excuses from attending class if it, conflicts with a psychiatry appointment. All sorts of things can be worked out to help you to be successful in a school setting. I hear this a lot. A lot of people disclose because they've been personally affected, they've felt stigma, and they want to help others. And that's not included on the table, but that's one that I added as I looked through this. And then, kind of hand in hand with that is advocacy. Some people tell their story because they believe that stigma is wrong and they want to speak out against it. So there's a variety of different reasons why people might disclose their mental illness. So what we would like for you to do now is to list all of the costs and benefits to coming out with mental illness from your perspective. And, this is a broad list at this point. Don't worry so much about setting as just some of the benefits and some of the costs. And so the benefits represent why you would want to come out with your mental illness. And the term coming out might sound a bit strange to use here because it's borrowed from the LGBTQ plus community, you know, coming out of the closet. This program was actually originally called Coming Out Proud. So you're hearing some of that language still in there. Really, coming out and disclosure are the same thing. And then the costs are the things that might prevent you from wanting to share your mental illness. Like, what are the things that would make it difficult or would make you not want to disclose? So go ahead and pause your video now. Visit the link. Go to the link that was sent to you via email and complete this in the electronic format. And then when you're ready, you can unpause the video. Okay, so we talked a minute ago about some of the benefits and costs, or benefits, I'm sorry, to disclosing, or reasons why people would want to disclose their mental illness. And then, you know, Carter alluded to some of the costs earlier. You disclose and you make yourself vulnerable to stigma. I've heard people say before in response to this one in terms of costs is that, you know, I disclose my mental illness and then all of a sudden everything that I do and everything that I say, people are seeing in the light of person living with mental illness instead of just Kristen, right? And so sometimes that can be really difficult. You know, stigma is real and it's out there, and discrimination does happen. So you might be subjecting yourself to the risk of discrimination, whether that's, you know, discrimination in an employment setting or people maybe avoiding you because they endorse some of these stereotypes around dangerousness and mental illness, which, by the way, are untrue, but nonetheless endorsed pretty commonly. I'm trying to think, are there any others? You know, it can have implications for romantic partnerships, friendships. You might feel more judged. You might not feel comfortable going back into the classroom after you've disclosed in that setting because of, you know, I've heard the term before. I don't know if you've ever heard this, Carter, vulnerability hangover. Have you ever heard that before?
Mm-hmm.
So you share it, and then a little while later, you're like, oh my goodness, what did I just share with everybody, right? So that's a real cost that sometimes comes with disclosure. I've experienced that personally before and thought, oh my gosh, what did I just share, you know? So those are some costs that could come along with disclosing. Now let's make a different kind of list. So those were some of the costs and benefits of coming out. Now, what are some of the costs and benefits of not disclosing? So of staying in the closet. So go ahead and pause your video now. This is table 1.2. If you can go ahead and complete that, and when you're ready, you're completing it in its electronic format. When you're ready, if you want to unpause your video, we can talk about some of the costs and benefits of not disclosing. Okay, so some of the benefits of not disclosing might be, you know, if you don't disclose, you protect yourself from stigma. You protect yourself from that vulnerable feeling that can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable. You don't risk judgment from the person that you're disclosing to. But some of the costs is you're forgoing that peer support. You're not able to connect with other people who might be able to provide you with that mutual support, who might be able to say something like, you know, I might not know exactly what you're going through, but I've been through something similar and you're not alone. It makes it difficult to get help from professional sources or from the Student Accessibility Services Office, for example, if you choose not to disclose. So those are some of the costs to not disclosing your mental health condition. Okay, so, you know, now at this point, if you were, you know, you'll get an email that will summarize all your responses to these tables. So you'll have them. I might encourage you to either print them out and put them with the manual for your reference later on, or, you know, save them in a special place on your computer so that you can go back and look at this later if you wanted to. But these are pretty much comprehensive lists that you've constructed of the pros and the cons of both disclosing and not disclosing your mental illness. Now, this list is not static. It could change over time. You could decide that something's not important to you any longer and revise your list. but this is your list as of today. Another thing that we need to think about is, and this is what the next table kind of introduces, and I don't know, Carter, maybe I'll let you take over there on table 1.3. But what that table is looking at is it's adding in this element of time, right? So not only are there pros and cons to disclosing, or costs and benefits to disclosing or not disclosing, there's also benefits and costs that can happen in the short term versus benefits and costs that can happen in the long term. So some of those are relatively immediate, where others are delayed. So there's an example that's given on page 12 in the participant workbook that talks about Alan and his identification of short-term costs and benefits to disclosing. So how about we do this, Carter? What if I have them pause their video right now? They can read through that example. The paragraph starts with impacts of costs and benefits are sometimes relatively immediate. And then it goes into Adam's story. And then when we unpause, maybe you could lead them through the answers that are in table 1.3.
Okay. So now that you've read through that section about Alan, they give us table 1.3, which is, again, it's with Alan, and the setting that he is thinking of disclosing in is in the classroom. So starting with the short-term benefits, some of the ones would be that there's others that can help him deal with the intimidating professor. So clearly there's some sort of relationship between Alan and the professor that's intimidating to him, makes him feel uncomfortable. So to him, one of the short-term benefits would be that he's got others that can help. Maybe he wants to talk that situation out, or maybe he might want to approach the professor anytime he wants to have a conversation. So he's got that support with him if he wants to have somebody else come with him. Another one of the short-term benefits would be that he doesn't have to keep it hidden. So again, that thought of how taxing and difficult it is on the body to actually try to hide that secret that you've got. So that's definitely one of the short-term benefits. Another one would be that he could identify with other classmates that have similar problems. So again, going back to Marie and Henry, you have that sort of advocacy where you're relating to other classmates, peers, so you've got mutual support with each other. And he might make more friends in class. Again, if he's got that intimidation factor between him and the professor, he might be trying to avoid any sort of relationships in that class. He might feel uncomfortable anytime he's there. So having more friends in that situation definitely would be a good benefit. But on the other hand, some of the costs would be, he may think some of his classmates won't ask him to lunch. So if he thinks that, right now his classmates may think he's cool and awesome, but then when he tells them that he's struggling, they may think, oh, he's weak, he's not cool. And then he may lose some of those friends that he thought were true friends before, perhaps. Another one would be worrying about others talking about him. So there's always that worry. I think a lot of people probably feel that if it's somebody that you don't know if you can trust, or if it's somebody you think you can trust and you tell them, there's that worry that they might tell somebody else, that it gets spread around, and then you've got a whole nother problem that you don't have control of, and that can just make things feel worse. And then lastly, for short-term costs, could be he could get left out of group study sessions. So again, like with the lunch thing, you may have a small group that they're very close, but they may think differently of him if he discloses to them. So definitely would be one of those things that he'd have to weigh the pros and cons and decide if that's somebody he would want to tell. Then for long-term benefits, the professor could provide extra help. So again, going back to the thought of accommodations, if he tells the professor that he is having some struggles, the professor may recommend that Alan go to the accommodations area at his school, get some accommodations that might help him, and that could ease his tension with the professor. And then again, there get help through class accommodations. So like Dr. Kosyluk said, you could get extra time on tests. You might be allowed to miss days, homework. You might get some more leniency on things like that. That would definitely help make schedules work better and help you feel more comfortable and confident in classes. And then lastly, a big one for pretty much any college student is avoiding dropping or failing the class, because obviously nobody wants to fail a class. And so he again would have those accommodations. He could have that more understanding relationship between him and the professor so that he could do his best in the class, work well with the professor, get things done the best he can, do the best he can in class. Some of the long-term costs, though, could be classmates wouldn't study with him. Again, going back to this thought that people oftentimes, because of stigma, look at people with a different lens once they know that you have mental health problems. No matter how you disclose to them, no matter if you tell them, I'm still functioning just fine, people just have this lens sometimes that really they can't look past. And rumors could start about him again, not knowing if that person that you've disclosed to is going to tell other people, if they're going to start saying, oh, Alan's not cool, he's weak, he's a bad student, there's something wrong with him, things like that. So that's something to think about. And then he may drop the class in embarrassment. So again, it's best to work with the professor, seek out those accommodations, make sure your classmates are supportive of you, understanding, so that you can be comfortable in that class and you can do your best in that class.
Yeah.
So here it says that in this list, they put a star next to the things that seem most important. So those would be things that you've listed out and you read through and you think, okay, that's a big one. That's one of the big deciding factors. If that's not on this list, then, it should be one of those things where you think that is very important. So two of the benefits that stood out for Alan were that he thinks he'd be able to make more friends in class. So in the past, he'd avoided socialization and studying with classmates because he was worried they would find out that he was hiding this secret from them. And the second one he picked was opening up to his professor because he was afraid that he was going to fail the class or he was going to have to drop out. And then the one cost that he starred was he was concerned that people would talk about him because, again, it's always this fear that you tell somebody, then they tell somebody, and then you've got something that's out of your control.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good thing to do if you fill out one of these tables, is put a star next to things that you find very important, that are crucial, that are sort of deal breakers, you could say, in the situation that you've made the setting for.
Yeah, Carter, I would just add one thing there, which I always, every time I run through this, I forget about this piece. And I think it's actually really interesting and important is that, when you look, I guess if I'm just eyeballing this list, it looks like there's more benefits that Alan has listed than costs.
Right.
This process isn't like an exact 1-to-1, right? So it's not like, okay, I have 10 benefits and 8 costs, so I must disclose because there's more benefits than costs. It doesn't work that way. Maybe the costs that Alan identifies are far more severe than the benefits are beneficial, right? And so then Alan, even though he might have only a couple of costs listed, they're so important to him that he decides, yeah, even though there's some benefits, it's just not worth it to me right now, right? So that's the other thing I always think is really interesting about making that decision.
Yeah.
Just wanted to get in there.
And like you were saying, he had all these costs and then he starred 2 costs. So it's not just the fact that there are more costs, he also put a star next to those. And so he really thought that the short-term benefits, there was a really good one, there was a really good long-term benefit. And so he really put a lot of emphasis on not just, like you said, the number of costs versus benefits, but that the benefits, there were some really important benefits.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So, table 1.4 provides like a list that, say you're going through this decision-making process, a month from now, you can revisit the manual and here's a list, some benefits and costs that you might think about. So you can use this as kind of like a crib sheet in a way, right? Like, do you even use that term anymore? Like a cheat sheet, right? Like you have a list that you can pick from, but this isn't exhaustive. So you might have others that you would add to this list. And then, the next and last activity in this book in this lesson is incorporating the setting into this decision-making process. So up until now, first, we just kind of listed out the pros and cons to disclosing and to not disclosing. And then we thought of them in terms of their long-term and their short-term benefits and costs. And now the next step is to add on the setting piece. And that's what worksheet 1.3 is all about, which is on page 17 of the participant workbook. So part of what I was just saying about the decision-making process actually comes up on page 15. If you wanted to pause your video and read through pages 14 and 15 of your workbook now, all the way up through 16, that might help set the stage for going through worksheet 1.3. So once you've done that, if you unpause, I'll just walk you through this worksheet and tell you what you're looking at here so that you can go ahead and work through this on your own. You'll see that there is a blank space next to setting on top of this worksheet. And there is also a blank space for to whom. So this could be in the classroom, to whom? To my teacher. Or it could be at home, to my roommate, or it could be in my church, to my pastor, right? There's all sorts of different combinations you could include there. So that's the first thing you want to make sure you do, is to include where you're considering disclosing and to whom you're considering disclosing. And then it's as simple as just doing what you already did, but thinking specifically about disclosure in this setting to this person. And remember, even though the title of this worksheet is the costs and benefits of disclosing my mental illness, you can cross off mental illness and use any term you want there. The costs and benefits of disclosing my challenges, or however you want to frame it, that is fine. So if you want to pause the video now, go ahead and complete that table, including the short-term benefits, the short-term costs, the long-term benefits, and the long-term costs, and then we'll finish up. Okay, so now that you have done this, review your lists and put a little asterisk, like Alan did, next to the costs and the benefits, both short and long-term, that you think are most important to you. Now, given these costs and benefits, it's time for you to weigh a disclosure decision. And there's 3 choices that are listed for you on this worksheet. And you have the electronic version of the worksheet. There is, I've decided to disclose my mental illness, I've decided not to disclose my mental illness, or I've decided to put off my decision. So maybe you're like, okay, this was helpful to look at the costs and the benefits, but I'm still not ready to make a choice right now. That's a completely valid option. So why don't you go ahead and select what response is appropriate for you. And the last piece here is that if we do decide to disclose, there are specific reasons we might disclose. Like, what is the goal for our disclosure? And if you go back to worksheet 1.1, which, just so that I eliminate any confusion, that is on page
Looks like 11.
Page 11?
I think so.
Yep, table 1.1, page 11, includes some of the benefits and costs of disclosure. So if you look at some of those benefits and costs, what are they? What were they for you? And so how do those relate to a goal? Are you disclosing to gain social support? Are you disclosing so that you can be getting treatment for your mental health condition? Are you disclosing for accommodations? What's the goal for you? And then what do you think will happen when you disclose? Do you think you'll get the accommodations you need? Do you think you'll get support from your roommate? So on and so forth. Okay, so that's the end of worksheet 1.3. Make sure that you go through each of those activities. Hopefully you were doing so as we were asking you to pause the video, but it's really important for you to go through those activities yourself in addition to having us lead you through them. And then I would just finish up by saying that lesson 2 will follow lesson 1. And that lesson focuses on looking at different ways to disclose. And it's comprised of 3 tasks. One is describing, there's 5 ways that you can disclose a mental health condition or any concealable identity for that matter. One of the things we didn't touch on at the very beginning is that mental illness, for the most part, is what's called a concealable stigmatized identity, meaning that unless you told somebody that you're living with a mental health condition, most people would never know. And so that's why we face this decision making, right? So there's 5 main ways that you can disclose. And then the second task of lesson 2 is guiding you through a process of selecting a person to whom you could disclose. And then task 3 helps you think through in advance how people might respond to your disclosure. So I wanted to point that out because that last question on worksheet 1.3 that you just completed was, what do you expect will happen after you disclose? That's kind of a foreshadowing for that third task in lesson 2. So just take a guess at it now, and then we'll walk you through that lesson or that task in the following lesson. Thank you so much for joining us today, Carter. Thanks for being a great co-facilitator.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to seeing you for lesson 2. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.